He thought it would be a joke, a billionaire humiliating a janitor in front of the world. But when she opened her mouth to sing, every chandelier shook and his empire began to crumble. It began in the grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel, where chandeliers glowed like artificial suns and the city's elite gathered in gowns and tuxedos that whispered of power and old money. The occasion was a charity gala hosted by Victor Harrington III, a billionaire who loved two things more than anything else: being the loudest voice in any room and humiliating those who could not defend themselves. The night had been choreographed like one of his business deals, polished, ostentatious, and cruelly calculated to display wealth. But like all his shows of dominance, there was always a victim. That night, his target was a woman named Althea Johnson, a hotel janitor who had been working double shifts for weeks just to keep her daughter in school. She had been moving quietly across the ballroom's marble floor, balancing a tray of empty glasses, when one slipped and shattered, the sound slicing through the orchestra's melody like a crack of thunder. Victor seized his moment. He raised his champagne glass and, with the booming voice that carried across the hall, declared that a woman so clumsy could only prove her worth if she entertained the guests. Laughter rippled through the crowd, the kind of laughter that never reached the eyes, sharp and cutting, designed to remind the help of their place. He announced his challenge as if presiding over a courtroom. If Althea could sing, truly sing, then he would give her a job far above her station, a position in his company's arts foundation. If not, she would clean the ballroom on her knees before dawn. The crowd gasped, then cheered as if cruelty was a sport worth betting on. His voice thundered again, promising, "Sing this song and you get the job." The orchestra faltered, unsure whether to continue, but Victor ordered them to play the opening notes of an aria from Verdi, an opera piece no one in the room expected a janitor to know. It was a trap dressed as entertainment. His wife smirked from her velvet seat. His business partners exchanged mocking glances, and the guests, dripping with pearls and gold, leaned in, eager for the humiliation about to unfold. But Althea did not cower. She placed the tray aside with careful dignity and stepped into the circle of eyes and whispers. Her uniform, plain and marked by long hours of work, looked out of place among the silk gowns, yet something in her posture, straight-backed, calm, unbroken, shifted the air in the room. It was the kind of presence that belonged to someone who had lived through storms and refused to bend. When the first note passed her lips, the entire ballroom stilled. What poured out was not the hesitant sound of a woman caught in a cruel game, but the soaring voice of a trained opera singer, resonant and precise, the kind of sound that could fill cathedrals and shake souls. The chandeliers seemed to tremble with her notes. Every vowel was drenched in emotion, every phrase a weapon turned against the arrogance of the room. The audience's laughter evaporated into silence. Eyes widened, breaths caught. Some women clutched their pearls, not in disdain, but in shock at the magnificence they had underestimated. Even the orchestra, startled by the authenticity of her performance, straightened in their seats and followed her lead as if they were accompanying a world-renowned diva. Althea was not just singing. She was reclaiming space that had been denied to her. Each note carried fragments of her story, nights of hunger when she practiced in secret, mornings scrubbing floors while her daughter slept, the years when her gift was buried under survival. The pain of invisibility poured into her performance, transforming the humiliation meant for her into a testimony of resilience. By the time she reached the aria's climax, tears glistened in the corners of eyes that had moments ago been filled with scorn. A young woman in the crowd whispered her recognition. This was no ordinary janitor. This was Althea Johnson, once a rising star in the conservatory circuit, a soprano whose career had been crushed years ago by the weight of poverty and circumstance. She had vanished before the world could know her name, forced into anonymity by bills, illness, and tragedy. Victor Harrington's smug grin had disappeared. His face tightened, his knuckles pale against the stem of his glass. This was not the spectacle he had ordered. He had tried to craft a joke and instead revealed a jewel he could not control. His humiliation was written in the rigid set of his jaw as applause erupted. Before the final note even faded, the ballroom, once unified in mockery, now rose in a standing ovation. Some clapped with genuine awe, others with the desperation of people trying to erase their own complicity in cruelty. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, and already whispers spread like wildfire. A billionaire mocked a janitor, only to uncover a hidden opera star. But Althea did not bask in their applause. She bowed her head with quiet grace, as if acknowledging not their approval, but her own survival. She had not sung for them, not for Victor, not for the bet. She had sung for her daughter, waiting at home, for the girl who still believed her mother was capable of magic. The ovation roared louder, but underneath it pulsed a different energy. The story of this night would not remain locked within those gilded walls. The recordings would travel across social media, across the world, transforming shame into power, cruelty into exposure. And while the guests clapped, while Victor's empire cracked under the weight of his arrogance, Althea quietly stepped back into the shadows, unaware of the storm her voice had just unleashed. The night was not over. The humiliation of a billionaire was only the first act. What followed would not only reshape Victor Harrington's legacy, but also ignite a chain of events that would change Althea's life forever. Because the world was about to remember her name, and Victor was about to pay the highest price for his arrogance. By sunrise the next morning, the Harrington name was everywhere for all the wrong reasons. Clips of Althea's performance flooded social media feeds, stitched and reposted with captions that burned. Billionaire mocks janitor gets humbled by opera star. The video crossed oceans in hours, sparking outrage and admiration alike. In boardrooms, Victor's associates watched the clip not with applause, but with cold calculation. They saw a man whose arrogance had become a liability, a leader who exposed the company to ridicule on a global scale. By mid-afternoon, calls poured in from investors demanding answers. Stock prices dipped, contracts wavered, and the Harrington brand, once synonymous with power, became the butt of late-night comedy. Victor tried to downplay it. He called the incident a misunderstanding, dismissed Althea's performance as a coincidence, and scolded the press for blowing things out of proportion. But his voice no longer carried weight. Every attempt to rewrite the story only amplified it. The world had already chosen its narrative, the cruel billionaire, brought low by the dignity of a woman he tried to humiliate. For Althea, the wave of attention was disorienting. Her phone buzzed with messages she hadn't expected, journalists requesting interviews, strangers offering donations, and opera companies extending invitations she once dreamed of but could no longer imagine accepting. For 15 years, her voice had been confined to empty apartments and whispered lullabies for her daughter. Now the world demanded to hear it again, but Althea was not naive. She knew the same voices cheering her today could vanish tomorrow. She had lived long enough to understand that public sympathy is fickle, that applause cannot pay rent or buy school supplies. Still, beneath her caution, something stirred, a possibility she thought had died long ago. Meanwhile, Victor's household crumbled. His wife, embarrassed by the headlines, withdrew from public events. His son, who had long resented his father's cruelty, refused to defend him. In hushed conversations, people whispered that Victor Harrington was finished, not because he had lost money, but because he had lost face. In elite circles, reputation was currency, and his had been shattered by a single woman's voice. The board of Harrington Enterprises convened an emergency meeting. Members sat stiff and formal around a polished mahogany table, their expressions grim. They cited losses, reputational damage, and Victor's reckless behavior. And then, in a move that stunned even him, they voted. By unanimous decision, Victor Harrington III was removed as chairman and stripped of his controlling power. The empire he had inherited was no longer his. The announcement hit headlines within hours. Billionaire ousted after opera humiliation. Victor raged behind closed doors, but the world outside had moved on, no longer caring about his fury. Althea's story, however, kept growing. Community centers invited her to perform for children who had never seen opera. Arts foundations offered her grants to teach. Young women from across the country wrote messages, saying they had been inspired by her resilience. What had begun as humiliation had become a movement, a story retold in classrooms, churches, and households as proof that dignity could triumph over cruelty. Still, Althea hesitated when the invitations for grand stages arrived. She knew her body no longer had the stamina for full operas, the endless rehearsals, the harsh spotlight. But she also knew she could still teach, still share, still pour into the next generation what life had forced her to keep hidden. With the help of donors who believed in her, she began laying plans for something bigger than herself. A school for young artists from working-class backgrounds. A place where talent would matter more than privilege. On the opening day of the Althea Johnson Arts Academy, the crowd was not dressed in gowns and tuxedos. They were children in everyday clothes, parents holding hands, neighbors who had saved coins to donate to the cause. There were no chandeliers, only sunlight pouring through tall windows. And yet the energy in the room felt richer than any gala. As Althea welcomed the students, her daughter stood proudly by her side. The girl who once fell asleep to her, mother's hidden songs now watched her step into the light without fear. And for the first time in years, Althea felt something stronger than survival. She felt legacy. Victor Harrington, meanwhile, was a ghost of his former self. Stripped of power, mocked in the press, abandoned by allies, he wandered from failed deals to empty rooms. The arrogance that once defined him had curdled into bitterness. He had money left, but no respect, no influence, no audience. And for a man who lived to be seen, invisibility was the cruelest punishment of all. The story became legend. The janitor who sang, the billionaire who fell. For some, it was entertainment, a viral clip replayed for laughs. For others, it was inspiration, a reminder that greatness hides in unexpected places. For Althea, it was proof that even when the world tries to bury you, a single act of courage can rewrite everything. Because in that ballroom, under chandeliers meant to blind, she had done more than sing. She had exposed a truth that no amount of wealth could erase, that dignity cannot be bought, and that a voice born of struggle carries more power than a crown of gold. And so the legend lived on, not of Victor Harrington, the billionaire whose empire crumbled, but of Althea Johnson, the woman who turned humiliation into triumph and built a legacy not on cruelty, but on song. Stories like this remind us dignity and courage will always outshine arrogance. If this moved you, hit subscribe and share this video so more voices like Althea's can be heard around the world.